Here's an interesting idea. As content creators, should we focus too much on clarity, on organization, on getting rid of typos, on polishing, on getting a book editor, on a great cover design, and so on? And should we also focus on saying it 1 minute or less, and very succinctly and rapidly, given what some say is an ADHD or ADD generation who can't sit still? Should we try and put it all in a 1 minute or less YouTube short, for instance? Well, that's a bunch of important questions, especially more and more to me. I had one relative, for instance, tell me a couple years ago, don't write anything again until you've been polishing it for the next 20 years, and then publish it and blow the world away. Well, I think, there may be a little bit of merit to that idea, except how do you know you're going to even live to that point in time? And secondly, if you only have one book to write, my goodness, there are people who come out with 30, 40, 50 books. How many actors, for instance, do you know who've been in just 1 or 2 movies that they said they're not going to come out with till they've polished it for 20 years? The average good actor or actress has been in at least 40, 50 movies, if not many, many more. Some of them, yes, were what they call bombs, but in fact, some of those movies that were claimed box office bombs were the greatest, the most empathetic movies of all, and they were quite proud of them. So why all this focus then on appealing to the bottom denomination? Why to the talk that you must dumb it down to the 3rd or 4th grade level, some advise? Why put it thus through software, what is it, like Gutenberg, that will tell you the college level or grade level of the writing you've come out with? And you strive then to dumb it down to Reader's Digest level for maximum impact. Well, what kind of impact are we talking about? For instance, Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones for many years was a heroin addict, but he didn't just take any old heroin. He bought, unbeknownst to many, pharmaceutical-grade heroin, and he measured it out extremely carefully each time to minimize side effects. You might say then, many thought who sold this to him that they were selling him a finely crafted product. Well, yes, but in the long run, was that true? And likewise, if we're selling something that is dumbed down, maybe many people like that in the short term, but is that sort of like pharmaceutical grade heroin? It's doing little or no good, maybe more harm than good. Maybe also, here's another idea. One person I know complained to me bitterly about courses, online courses, and said they're all shams. Now, this person also tried, after a successful career of sorts as an engineer, real estate, and they bombed out in 2 weeks, despite their intellect. Seems to me this person wanted an instant career and wanted instant growth in general from courses. They didn't want to build things brick and brick. They wanted it instantly, kind of like a quick pill of choice, magic bullet pill, only they wanted it in course form or like in book form. They wanted to download in 5 minutes the essence of how to be maximally happy in life. All in 5 minutes. How to reach so-called enlightenment, if you would. A term I don't exactly agree with, but the concept, how do you reach maximal happiness in 5 minutes or less, instead of building a building brick by brick? Many, sadly, I believe, don't know how to build anything at all. They want to build something, but they don't know how to review. So they build something, and by night it gets washed away by the process of forgetting. Or maybe they try and build, but they have such high anxiety levels that they can't focus for more than 2 seconds, which is what you sometimes call the ADHD generation. Uh, and thus they want it all quick and easy because they can't handle complexity, they can't handle learning anything under high levels of pressure and anxiety in general. They can't build anything in the sense of building it brick by brick like a house. They want a prefab house, basically, up overnight. They don't want to have to build it over a period of time or wait for someone to build it over a period of time. So if we're going to dumb things down, so to speak, or make it so polished that it is accessible in 5 seconds or less, well, what kind of person would want this kind of material in the first place? Are they basically the type who are on a rather elementary level, some would say the toddler level? Are they eating and demanding baby food instead of whole food? Now, yes, for the baby, whole food will be undigestible. But for the adult, maybe baby food isn't going to get you anywhere, for whatever reasons. It may simply be too boring, too unpalatable. You want more flavor out of life. You want more complexity, more understanding. It's too trivial. Maybe that's why some of the greatest writers have been very complex and hard to understand, for several reasons. James Joyce, for instance, who wrote a very powerful book, Ulysses, amongst others. Anton Chekhov, a short story writer. He was once a physician. His short stories were said to be very hard to understand, and yet, at the present time, his plays are watched more than any except Shakespeare's. And yet, it's said his short stories or writings are so hard to understand. And then, here's my other point. The persons who have a lot to say, stuff of substance, in my opinion, it's because their premises, their viewpoints on an elementary level, their basics are much more sound than average. And so they have much less cognitive dissonance and they're much more prolific. Whereas otherwise a person may just come out with 1 or 2 books, if that, their whole lifetime, or 1 or 2 movies. I won't mention names, but I know one man who only came out with 1 movie, basically, despite being in the public entertainment field on radio for many, many decades. So if a person is very prolific and their ideas are quite sound in general, do you think they have the time and the money to hire all kinds of editors and book cover designers and have this stuff all polished up all the time? In fact, they often get criticized for dictating a book in 1 hour, say, when in fact it took a lifetime to create, or their premises were rather sound from the very get-go in life due to their particularly unusual upbringings, and then everything else followed. In fact, to me, a sign that a person has much more than average of value to say to society for long-term living, long-term expediency, is their level of being prolific. Of course, there's always going to be mistakes in all of our thinking, even amongst the most prolific, but these, in my mind, are the people who have the least cognitive dissonance because they have the least clashing of ideas as per reality, and so they're the most prolific right there. They get called geniuses when in fact they're simply people, in my mind, who don't have unusual brains as per their synapses or size, mass of the brain, weight, but simply the least cognitive dissonance because their premises are more sound on average in quantity or impact. So right there they're much more prolific, and they don't have the time to fuss around polishing all this stuff. They want to get their 100 books, their 500 books out before they die. And they say, well, let posterity sort it out for those who are able to assimilate adult food instead of baby food. Those who can only eat baby food probably really couldn't benefit by anything that is very simply laid out to the polished and highest degree of organization because they're not interested in that. What they want is their drugs of choice. They want the escapism. They want the blame shifting. They want low empathy. And until they grow far and far more out of that, they wouldn't even benefit by something well organized and succinct and polished if it isn't expedient only in the short term. As they say, when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears, or when the student is ready, they're ready to eat adult food that has much more substance, much more complexity and value to it, and interest to it, and then they're able to sit down and parse through it. That is not polished. I'll leave with one last thought that I've talked of before, and that's various scriptures in various religious books, whether it's the Christian's Bible or whatever. These items were not polished by the sages. They simply came out of the people's mouths, complete with various repetitious flaws. They repeat themselves sometimes. They are rather unclear sometimes, maybe even somewhat contradictory. And there's no outline, basically, even for the Bible. There's no chapter headings, simply the names of the books, not the contents. And that's why then people used to go to Sunday school and churches and hear the same lectures over and over on love or forgiveness or various aspects of growth. And they didn't demand that it all be very succinct and heard only one time only, as if delivered for inoculatory purposes, like an inoculation and a booster every 5 years. No, they wanted and were ready for growing, and they were prepared to pay the price in terms of building things brick by brick. And they were able to focus their minds because they didn't have such high anxiety levels either, or chronic anger, or high levels of anything else that were toxic to thinking and building something in general. So that, though, has shifted so much more in recent years. But that's another topic, I believe, and very complex. But at any rate, that's my thinking then on why perhaps we should think twice about fussing about dumbing things down to 3rd and 4th grade level, or Reader's Digest level, say 7th grade level, and why we shouldn't hold ourselves back in publishing and saying anything until it's polished completely, or completely error-free, or cosmetically fingerprint-free, as I call it. Lipstick orientations to our content. Even obsessing too much, thinking too much over, oh my goodness, what if I'm disrespectful with a certain word that came out? What if I stick my foot in my mouth on this particular topic or area? If we're going to fuss about that to the nth degree, nobody would have ever created anything, and we would have been far the worse off in many respects in our world. For otherwise, who wants to have to reinvent calculus on their own, or any of the good points from any of the religions, or anything? It's our ability to sort through the wheat from the chaff, think for ourselves, accept that no one has all the answers, and refine, refine, refine. Iterate, iterate, iterate. That's what makes us special. Not whether or not we can find content to download in 2 seconds to change our lives from 0 to 100 miles per hour in 2 seconds. I wish you well with these ideas then.